Hello and welcome to Salem Voices. So glad to be back. I'm Lucy Rose, your host, and I am thrilled to death today to introduce our special guest from the Salem College class of 1981, Jennie McLaurin. Jennie's joined us today from her home in Washington State. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm so glad to be with you. It's
Not
fun.
nearly as glad as I am to have you with us. I look at everything you've accomplished in your life and I'm just absolutely blown away, and it continues every day. So I can't wait to let everybody else know what you do and what you contribute to the world. So let's just get into it. I really love it. From Salem Senior to pediatrician, writer, and public health expert. I think I got most of those. I'm just going to say what an impact you've made in your incredible life journey already. And you've raised 5 children in addition to that, which I just cannot even conceive of. My hands are full with 2. So 5 is amazing, but wow is all I got to say. So why don't you take us kind of through what's happened with you in your life in 5 minutes or less. Now this is a real test, isn't it? From Salem Senior to where you are today. What have you done along the way?
All right. That is probably the toughest question you're asking because of the 5 minutes or less.
Of course.
And I just want to preface by saying, whether it's 1 child or 5 children or 15 children, they use up every bit of energy you have. So
Well, clearly not all of yours, because you've done a lot of other things too.
Yeah, they use up all your energy. But I started out after Salem. I really struggled actually with whether to go to medical school or I was going to go study chemistry. I was going, at one point, I really loved theater arts management. That was a new thing at Salem. So I've always liked variety, but I went to medical school, and literally because I had huge medical school debts, I stayed the course until I could finish, get my pediatrics degree. But I had the wonderful opportunity that really changed my life to go to India when I was in medical school. And I worked in rural health and also worked in a hospital. And the woman who mentored me was an Indian physician who trained in the US and went back to India, and which is highly unusual. And she was a pediatrician, and she got her master's in maternal and child health. So I just did what she did. And I got a master's in maternal and child health at Chapel Hill. And that gave me a real ability to look at population-based needs and not just at the person in the exam room. And then after that, I got my very first job in a migrant health center in North Carolina. And that was because I volunteered when I was in medical school with a migrant population in North Carolina. And there are 40,000 migrant farm workers in Eastern North Carolina. And it's like being in another world. And we didn't learn anything about them in medical school. And so when I went there, it was as profound for me as going to India. And it really stayed with me. And I wanted to be part of a solution in America in public health. So got a job with them, stayed there. And then things just sort of happened where somebody needed help with a program, and I volunteered, and one thing led to the next. And I got real involved with the national public health program in community health centers. So I had the opportunity to travel all over the US teaching and giving talks on things like cultural competency and health disparities. And then my family moved to Washington State just for fun. I was going to get a grad degree up at a theology school in Canada called Regent College. It's in the British system, so it says college, but it's a graduate program. And it was just fun for my own learning. And so we were going to be out here maybe 1 or 2 years, and now it's been almost 20, and it's home. And my career took a bend where I also taught bioethics in a theological setting, and continued my public health work. And now I work with special needs children. I've worked on an island called Molokai in Hawaii that most people are unaware of. That's very Native Hawaiian. And I was the only pediatrician there. They flew me in every month to see the children. and I've traveled to some amazing places, doing clinical oversight, clinical evaluation. But here we are in Washington State, 30 something, I don't know how many years since I graduated, whatever it is, 81 to now.
You don't have to count. It's
A
okay.
long time.
It's a long time, but you know what?
40, almost 40 years.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
But I hope now already the people that are watching this have got a feel of what I was talking about when I introduced you. I mean, what an incredibly full life. All the things that you've done, the places you've been, and by my count, 3 graduate degrees. Okay,
Right.
so I think I heard you say medical school, MPH at Chapel Hill in child and maternal health, and a master's degree in theology. I just want to say, A, who does that? You know, unbelievable. And then how do all these fit together to inform and guide your work and impact? Because somehow or another, you got 3 major things here, and you're using everything you learned, is my best guess.
I am using everything I learned, and I like school. I had to finally stop going to school when my kids started going to college.
Yeah.
So that we could help them with their school.
Yeah.
But at first the theology degree was just for fun. It was actually, I was studying some writing, and we'll talk about that later, but I like to write. And it was really just for my own enhancement. And I just wanted to have a chance to look at philosophy and religion and culture and different perspectives. And so I just took some courses on the side, but people that know me would not be surprised. I took them for credit because I wanted the professors to read what I wrote, and I wanted feedback. So I took them for credit, and then they said, you can't take any more unless you enroll to get the degree.
Okay.
So I did that. But I specifically did not want to do bioethics or medical ethics because I wanted to get away from medicine. But as it turned out, the more I thought about it, I couldn't get away from it, because the more I wanted to say something about it and what bothered me and how I thought our approach was wrong and that sort of thing. So I just went deep into it and wrote a thesis on our culture of medicine and how it looks from both a theological perspective and the Christian traditions, but also in our cultural perspective in terms of telling us what our ethics are about what we value when we look at the way we do medicine in North America.
So let's build on the ethics part, because that's really a cool thing to be thinking about today, particularly. Mm-hmm. I think there are more challenges than ever in numerous aspects of medicine, and including, things like artificial intelligence and robotics, much less all the other pieces you're used to working in.
Yeah.
How does bioethics continue to play a role in your focus and what you do? And, what are the big issues that you see kind of on the horizon that we should be thinking about in bioethics?
Well, and I know, Lucy, you have such a background yourself, so you could think of many of the ways that bioethics challenges us right now. And so what I tell students is bioethics is not concerned with what can we do, because we've already figured that out. It's what should we do with what we have. So yes, artificial intelligence is a good example of that. We have it, but what are the limits of its use and where is it beneficial? In my world, the place that I'm rooted in public health, I look at the ethics of sort of the haves and the have-nots, and we're looking at COVID. And right now people are screaming about masks, and unfortunately that is still going on. I was hoping it'd be done, but it's not. So it's the ethics of rights, and whether I have an individual right to my freedom that would be able to prevail upon your health. And in the US, not unlike most other countries in the world, we've let people have their individual rights around healthcare in a way that most of the world doesn't. So even our lockdowns are very minimal, and our mask wearing very provisional. But my concern more than that has been for a very long time has just been the idea that healthcare is a human right, and it's not just a piece of commerce. And the ethic in our country is more that it's a good that can be exchanged and has a value. And so when you actually raise that to an ethical issue with people and you say, okay, let's take that down to its conclusion there. How do you decide who's in and who's out? Because bioethics, first of all, deals with humans and then the general nature, anything that's alive, but for the most part, especially medical bioethics, humans. So first you decide who's a human, right? And that's where the end of life, the beginning of life, great disability, that sort of thing, all comes to bear. But for me, it also comes to bear with the immigrant and with racial disparities in healthcare, that we've decided that some people are less included in our healthcare than others. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear, but.
No, I just think it's so important. And I know you taught biomedical ethics as well. And it's a place that's near and dear to my heart as well. Everything from access to medicine to clinical trials, and how certain folks are involved in clinical trials and others historically have not been, and what we
Right.
don't know. So I think there's so many issues that, bioethics kind of needs to be looking at. And so anytime I can talk with somebody who's an expert in that field, it just gets me going. So thank you. But let's build on that just a bit. I mean, clearly throughout your whole professional life, you've had a profound, I should say, commitment to marginalized and underserved communities, like you just said, such as the migrant, the homeless, indigenous, special needs population. You've worked in cross-cultural medicine in a public health setting, really your whole life. Where did that passion come from, and the impact, and what's the impact meant to you as a person? So how did you develop that passion?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not entirely sure of the answer, because there was never just an aha moment.
Okay.
My father was a physician, and he was a dean of medicine, and he really spoke fiercely about public health and the need for public health. So I grew up sort of hearing that on the side. And I always loved hearing stories of people who went to exotic places and traveled. And a lot of times, because of how I grew up, that was like missionary stories. So I hear about them and think that was interesting. But somebody told me, Jennie, you just love the world. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm not really sure why, but I do. I love learning about people and all the different variety of ways that people live on this planet. And one of the wonderful things about medicine is that healthcare in general, it lets you come into contact with a world of people that you might not otherwise come in contact with. But I think the passion for the marginalized and the outcast, now it's deeply rooted in my theology, but it wasn't always. So it was there. But I think it was also, I know in other ways, particularly growing up, what it was like to feel marginalized and to feel not part of the group, not included, or not the cool one or whatever. And I always had a soft spot for the underdog. And I don't know, I felt like they were easier. It was easier to be real sometimes with people who were on the fringes than it was with people who were the haves. And yeah, I don't know. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well.
You're just in beautiful, beautiful ways that you don't even realize, I think. Your enjoyment of writing comes through in your ability to share as well, or orally. So it's beautiful. And that leads me to, you must, with all this amazing work that you've done, you must have developed huge amounts of wonderful friends all over the world. And B, my guess is you probably have so many stories, you could talk for the next 20 hours with stories. But is there a story that really just jumps out at you that might give folks a real idea of the impact your work, has made in the world and the people that you serve? Something that gives us a strong feeling about that.
Yeah, well, I have a couple, and so I'll try to be quick. But one of my very favorite stories that I used in teaching for many years was way back at that migrant health center in North Carolina, and it just reset how I thought about medical care. So it was a very busy place. I'm a pediatrician,
Yeah.
but they made me see people that they said were walk-ins who had been sick, and so almost no matter the age when I first started working there. So anyway, one Monday morning, this young guy comes in. He's about 18. He's Haitian, but he speaks great English, and he was working in the tobacco fields, and he has a really bad headache. And Monday mornings, we had a lot of people with headaches. Sometimes they'd been drinking too much on the weekend. Sometimes they were just dehydrated. It was hot. Sometimes it was the nicotine patches from the tobacco.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, yeah, you have a headache. But he spoke perfect English. He had been a court interpreter in Florida, so for Haitians. Anyway, AIDS had just started exploding in Haiti and in the US around that time. And so I was questioning him, and I kept questioning him, and there was something a little off about him. And I did neurological tests on him. I normally I would have just given him some pills, said, take some Motrin, drink a lot of water, see you later.
Yeah.
But there was something a little off about him. And so I did a neurological test, and he was all wavy with his hands. And I said, I don't know. And so I asked all these HIV questions, and I asked other questions. And finally he laughed, and he looked at me, and he goes, I do not have HIV. And I asked my first good question. I said, what do you think you have? And he said, well, when I was in Florida, they told me I had diabetes, but I didn't believe them because it didn't help my legs. I said, what do you mean it didn't help your legs? He goes, well, I'm a soccer player, and my legs ached with when they said I had diabetes, but I took those shots and my legs still ached. So I quit taking them. Well, he was an insulin dependent person with diabetes, which is really scary. But that lesson just taught me about listening, and about health beliefs, and about culture, and about what did you think the shots were going to do for you? He thought they were going to make his legs feel better, not just take care of his glucose. Anyway, long story short, his blood sugar was like sky high, and it was diabetes, and it wasn't HIV or anything, brain tumor or anything else. It was plain old diabetes. And we got him back in shape, but we got him in shape by helping his health beliefs kind of come in line with our health beliefs. And it taught me forever after how to ask better questions and listen better to people.
Isn't it? It really is all about the questions we ask.
Yeah.
It really is. It's those folks who know the right questions that end up being the most successful. And I think one of the things we have to constantly think about in our lives, and as we educate others too, is the whole concept too of critical thinking. Being able to think beyond just what somebody's telling you to figure out what those right questions are. So what a life lesson for you to learn that at that point. I look again at the breadth and scope and impact, frankly, of your national and really international consulting work as well. And it's hard for me to even remember it all, but I think you've led programs to advance food security. I mean, the breadth of this is amazing to me. Reduce childhood obesity, improve immunization access, reduce health disparities, and you've provided consulting, training, your wisdom, et cetera, to over 1,400 community health centers. First, how do you have time to breathe is, and raise 5 children. But then I just want to take a few minutes. Tell us just about, obviously you've done a bunch of stuff, but how did you even create all those opportunities to make impact? Because they didn't just fall on your doorstep. And then what leadership lessons have you learned throughout your career?
Yeah, you're right. They didn't just fall on my doorstep. And they all happened sort of one at a time. well, sometimes multiple at the same time.
Yeah.
And I have to give a shout out to my husband. He is my life partner, superb human being who took care of those 5 children a lot.
A lot.
Yeah. So, all right, let me try to get my head around this. So again, you said, what were the leadership problems, or how did I do all of that?
Yeah, how did you create those? I mean, obviously you went with an intent of making a difference. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Then you found out ways to make those differences. And I'm just wondering along the way, and I'm going to ask you too, if you found any of that at Salem as well in a minute, just as a preview.
Yeah.
But what leadership lessons did you learn? What would you share from all of this for anybody else who might want to do the kind of work or make an impact like you've done? What can you share with them? What insights have you gotten here?
Okay. Well, one thing I've heard a lot of people say in leadership is to say yes when you can. So I did say yes a lot, even if I wasn't sure. There were many times, and this is maybe even one of them, where I think I'm not the best person that you could ask for this job. But if you're asking me, I'll jump in and try to do it. And I think that's the reason I got a lot of the work I got, is because I was willing to put my heart into it, and I was willing to learn, and always, always, always learn. And I think being a lifelong learner, the dean of the medical students school said that to us when we began. And I remember thinking at the time I was tired, and I was sort of discouraged by how much I was going to have to study my whole life. But the reality is, whatever you do, if you're going to be really good at it, you have to always be learning. And so I've often taken positions where I don't already know how to do it, but I'm going to learn how to do it, and I'm going to become really good at it. And another thing is, I love this writer, Frederick Buechner. He's a secular he's been a novelist and a memoirist and other things. And he did a memoir, and he said, the place that God calls you to is where the world's deepest needs and your heart's strongest passions collide. And you don't have to have the word God in there if you don't want it in there, but it's basically the place any of us are called to, because there's always lots of good choices. And I always had lots of good choices, but I tried to lean towards my kind of true north and my passion, which was marginalized, underserved, cross culture. So I leaned that way. And then I looked where in my world, it was North Carolina. It wasn't India, but it was Eastern North Carolina, where I didn't think I wanted to live. But we lived there because that was where the work was. And then I learned to appreciate the beauty of that part of the state and the people there. And then when I first got into leadership at a national level, I was contacted by people who knew me. I mean, it did sort of drop in a way, but I continued to say yes to some things where I thought, I'm really a pediatrician. I like kids. This is a little bit more about adults. Some of the work that I've been involved in, even now on immunization access, was a little more adult oriented, but now it's COVID. So
yeah.
I think every door opens another door. And a leadership thing that one of my professors at Regent, a mentor, she's a writer, told us when somebody asked about where should I send my articles, should I send them to the Atlantic, the New Yorker, and I'm sitting in the seat thinking, you're crazy. Nobody knows you, and you just are going to go to the big ones first, but neither of us had the right perspective. Our professor said, you take care of the depth, and the breadth will take care of itself. So basically, be excellent, go deep, and the breadth takes care of itself. And that's been true in my life. I just need to go really deep into all that I can in the work before me, and the doors that are supposed to open.
Well, I think we should talk about one of those doors that's getting ready to open for you, I think. You're getting ready to open the door for lots of other people, I hope, as well, because if I listened to you correctly when we chatted earlier, come this next August, so 10 months or so from now, you're going to publish a new book. I mentioned at the beginning you're a writer, and you like to write professionally and personally. And you got a book that's coming out that'll be published very shortly, really, in relative time, 10 months.
Yeah, in relative time.
Yeah, from publication standards, that's pretty soon.
Yeah.
Tell us about it. Congratulations first. I mean, what a really sense of wholeness and completeness to do something like that. But tell us briefly about the book. What's it going to be like? And I can't wait to order it. Maybe we can order now.
Thanks, Lucy. You can't order now, and I'll send you one.
Okay.
But it's called Designed to Heal, and you were asking about people I've met, and one of the wonderful people I met is my co-author, and her name is Cymbeline Culiat, and she's Filipino American. She's a molecular geneticist who worked on the human genome, and we got to be friends through a grant that I wrote, and she's in Tennessee, and so we struck up a friendship after working on a grant together. And she works on wound healing and at a molecular level, genetic level. And we were talking and said, isn't it amazing how the body just knows how to heal? The body's just designed to heal. It's not designed to fester with a wound, and you don't walk around with holes all over you from where you got hurt in the past. It heals, and you don't have to pay attention to it half the time. You know, you skin your knee, a few days later, it's better. You got new skin. So we talked about that, and we compared it to the way our society and our families, all of us, really have such a hard time after we're wounded. It's hard to heal, and we don't just naturally go towards it. So the book explores the wound healing process of the body that happens in 4 discrete stages, and I know you know all about that. And then uses that as an allegory or a parable for how we might apply those same processes to healing our relational wounds and our societal wounds. And it was just a joy to work on, and there are a bunch of patient stories in there.
Right.
And because we used my patients' stories of particular wounds to illustrate that part of wound healing, right? So if we're talking about clotting, I had a story about clotting, somebody with a clotting issue. And if we're talking about a more serious, deep wound that can cause lots of pressure, then we had a story about that. But my friend Bem and I, we cross-cultural friendship, but what we found through that writing is our own wounds, our woundedness in our own lives, so similar.
I really can't wait to hear and read your thinking. And I say hear because we'll actually hear the stories, even though we'll read them. My guess is you're going to bring it to life. So I really can't wait to read your book. And I think when you think about clotting, and I think about relationships, I think I may have mentioned this to you earlier. I always think about first stop the bleeding, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how you deal with that from a relational standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we had tons of time to kind of probe on that, but I am going to shift gears now just for the last 15 minutes we have together. But I want to start and move into Salem more specifically. And I think as we move into Salem, first thing I'm going to do, and I've done this with everybody, so I'm going to do that with you too, just kind of a quick rapid fire round here. Just one word is fine for each of these, if you can possibly do that. It's hard. But what was your favorite course? And it might be more than one word just to say the course name, but.
Organic chemistry. I loved it.
You're the only person who's ever going to say that in all of the interviews I do. Who was your teacher, just so that they know that
Craig Miller.
Okay. Outstanding. Oh, really and truly, way to go. All right. So which faculty member, and this is a little bit hard, but which one stands out as having had the greatest impact on you at Salem?
I have to pick 2. Well, Craig Miller is one, but George McKnight is another.
And George McKnight. Okay.
George and I had a lot of friendly fire, but a great relationship. Yeah. And still do. Hey,
they did something right. And since you've given them a shout out, we'll make sure they see the video. Okay. So, all right. What was your favorite tradition at Salem?
I loved Easter sunrise because I'd never seen anything like it. And I
Ah,
know that's probably odd to people. And I didn't even have a faith half the time, but I loved it.
I love the silence, and then to
I
hear the
did. And I
brass,
love
to
the
hear the brass
bands. Yeah.
intentionally play. Yeah, I can see it, hear it, feel it right now as we talk about that. I love that. When you needed a place on campus to go, just to appreciate the beauty of the campus or get away and go think and recharge, where did you head?
Again, I hope people aren't too critical, but I went to the graveyard.
Now, if anybody's critical about that, I can't think of a more lovely, quiet, beautiful place than there.
Yeah, by the
So
ginkgo tree. I loved that ginkgo tree.
by the ginkgo tree. That's a beautiful leaf on the ginkgo. I love
I
ginkgo.
loved it.
Most resilient of all trees, ginkgo. Uh,
Oh,
okay. You didn't just, what did you say? I love the what?
oh, I loved the ginkgo tree. I
Ginkgo.
had never seen, I didn't know anything about them until I came to Salem.
I wanted to make sure I didn't talk over you. I wanted to hear what you had to say. Okay, you love the tree. I did too. And they're all over there, which is beautiful.
Mhm.
Okay, as we move into Salem, obviously we're going to think about women leaders as well as we do that. In health, since that's what we're talking about today, clearly public health, health, and health in all ways, only 25% of senior leaders in health are women. From your perspective, how important is it for women to rise to these senior levels and why?
Well, Lucy, I bet you know my perspective.
I don't know for
I
sure,
think
and not
it's
everybody else does.
critical. It's critical that women rise to leadership in healthcare. And it's stunning to me that it's that low after all these years. When I started medical school, 50% of the freshman class were women. Now it's well above that.
Yeah.
But um, it's critical because many of our health disparities that we have are in women. They're in women and minorities. And it's because they haven't studied these things in women's bodies. And the people that have led the charge in the teaching and the research haven't understood the value in that in some ways. And it's critical. And the other thing is just, I think, you asked me about having 5 children. I don't know if my husband were being interviewed by Chapel Hill, where he went, if they would have mentioned that he had 5 children. Women go through the whole life cycle. And some of us have kids, some don't, some have partners, some don't. But we're fully enveloped in that whole life cycle and caring ways that really are distinct, I think. And that perspective outward is really needed as we develop healthcare for the whole. So that's one reason, and just simple justice and equality is another reason. But yeah, I think it will be a kinder situation. Just since women have been in medicine, they quit that 120-hour work week that I had when I started.
Right.
And now and they started maternity. I was told, you're not having children, are you? When I applied to medical school. I was told that even though it was against the law. Well, now, the men are taking paternity leave. So there's been a lot of healthy ways when we talk about healthy ways that life has changed as women have populated that area more.
So as we talk about the need for this, and you obviously went to Salem and you became one of those senior women health leaders. How did Salem help prepare you? What did it give you that enabled you to be able to do all the things that you did? What impact did Salem have on your life?
So when I first came to Salem, I was a big leader in high school and I came on a scholarship. And so I remember Paige French saying once, Jennie, you're one person that doesn't need assertiveness training.
Oh, how about that? Okay.
So I remember thinking that I already knew a lot of like what it meant to be a leader, but that wasn't true. And then I took physics at Wake Forest in the summer, and I remember just being hit in the face with how the professor looked at the guys and called on the guys and all of that. I made an A, but I saw the difference even there. And then when I went to medical school, I really saw the difference because we had learned to write well at Salem and speak well and show up and be present. And if you're in little tiny classes, everybody knows if you're not there.
That's
And
right.
so even though the written work, I would say was probably harder for me than for some people that had been pre-med, the rounds work and the being with the people and the noticing the systems and the organization and all of that was much easier for me. And Salem, I think, because it's liberal arts and I wanted to be exposed to multiple ways of thinking, that it was easier for me to be more inclusive of others in leadership and to be more collaborative and to be able to say that, well, this string here might bring some good information that we wouldn't otherwise get. And a leader can never just rely on their own expertise, ever. It's always about who's around the table.
I love that thought right there. You've already shown a difference in how real leaders think. You're absolutely correct. It's never just about my opinion. It's about
Yeah.
having the best and brightest around you and encouraging them to share their opinion so we can all
Yeah.
put it together. Yeah.
And being authentically yourself. I'm not sure if we're about out of time, but I just remembered one thing I wanted to share, and that was that when I was a resident in pediatrics, one of my mentors who wanted to see me be a big academic pediatrician, which I ended up not being, said, well, if you go into infectious diseases, that's where all the chairs of pediatrics are. You can be a chair of pediatrics. And he was complimenting me, trying to guide me that way. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I want to be a chair of pediatrics. But that sort of almost cookie cutter way of going into leadership, if somebody says you should do this, you do that. And I think Salem really helps you not just fall prey to whatever the design of the day is, and I know Salem's doing healthcare leadership now, and I think that's wonderful, but I hope anybody who listens knows that you can do anything. You can write, you can practice a clinical thing, you can do law, you can do ethics, you can teach, you can do PE, you can be a PE teacher. I mean, you can do anything. And that's, that's a gift.
It is. So as you think about Salem, and now we're kind of focused on that as well, but thank you for sharing that because just to go back 1 second, what you just said, I think is so worth distilling because, you really, life changes, life moves on,
Oh,
you
yes.
learn and you grow. And I look at your career path and all the different things you've added and components you've done to continuously learn and enrich yourself. And it really is about, you're not put in some little box for life. And this is what you have to do.
Right.
It really is about, you may decide you want to do health advocacy as an example. And then at some point you really want to go ahead and get into politics where you can actually make a difference in policy or work for government or any of those things. And your openness to that is important. So well done. And I just think now about Salem, and I've asked everybody this, and it's a challenge for me to try to define what I mean by secret sauce. Okay. But maybe you can figure it out for me, at least enough to answer it. What about your experience at Salem? When you think about Salem and you get that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling going on and you start smiling at yourself, what is it that makes you feel that way about Salem? What are your memories that make you say, wow, that was the perfect choice for me?
Yeah. I came to Salem at a time where in my own family, I felt pretty lost and not healthy. And Salem was family for me. And really the professors were my secret sauce, more than the students. I had good friends, but my professors, I knew they cared, and I knew they cared about my well-being, that they cared not just about whether I was a good student, but I lived with them at nights one summer, when I worked I was a lab assistant at Wake Forest. And Craig Miller, I'd been to his house, and yeah, they took such an interest in me as a person. I think that was it. And I know my husband's just blown away by it. My friends are actually closer. I have more friends in my class, somewhat thanks to Facebook, but also reunions
Yeah.
now than I might have even had when I was at Salem.
I find the same thing.
It
And it's,
really,
and
and it's fun. I love it.
And
I
friends
love
that you weren't
it.
even really great friends with, perhaps, when you were at
Right,
Salem, suddenly you are. And the other
right,
thing I find about Salem community and Salem sisters is that we didn't know each other until very
right.
recently, really. But there's something about an automatic bond that's there.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, there
part of
is.
that secret sauce somehow, don't you think? I just love that. But I also, one other thing about your professors, one of the beauties of a small school because
Mhm,
all your professors are teaching professors. They
mhm,
actually are teaching you and they
mhm.
get to know you. They're not, somebody who just has office hours and someone else teaches. They know who you are, which brings me to our next to the last question as we draw to a close. If you were to write a letter to your 20-year-old self, knowing what you now know, because we've got students who'll be watching this, we've got young alums who'll be watching. What would you tell yourself that you didn't know at 20 that you do now and wish you had known when you were 20?
Hmm. Part of it is what you said, which is life changes, it goes on, and you don't have to worry that you've made some choice that's irrevocable, because choices are, career-wise anyway, are flexible. And the other is go where your heart is, go where your joy is, go where you're going to feel most alive. And don't worry about what other people think. I, I, had a very non-traditional path in terms of clinical medicine, and for a while I did worry about what other people think. But then I was like, it's fine. It's my life, and it's who I am. So be yourself. Be yourself, and if you're really yourself, and you let yourself love the world around you and let people love you back, it all works out. How's that?
That's great. I just think that's unbelievable. It is all about being yourself and letting the folks find you too, that
Yeah.
you're going to be with, you know what I mean? And it's hard to do. And the hardest thing for me is to do what you just said. Don't care what other people think. It's easy
Yeah.
to say that. It's much
It
harder
is.
to
I
live.
mean, I cared when I was at Salem, and I felt like I never really fit in with some of the more popular girls. But the funny thing is, they're my Facebook friends and they're so fun, and I love them, and they love me back,
And they love you back because
Yeah.
they appreciate you for who you are as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
speaking of, it's time to bring it home. We got to end today, even though I'd love to chat with you for the next 2 hours or lifetime. But I'm gonna give you the last word. So look right at the camera, say whatever comes to your heart. What would you like to share as your important last mic drop take home with no pressure here, clearly? But what do you want to leave our viewers with today?
All right. Go where love takes you.
And with that, mic drop, as I promised. So I don't even know how to thank you for sharing your life with us today, your time with us, something about your journey, for everything you've done to make such a huge impact on the world and continue to do. So on behalf of all of us at Salem, and I'm quite sure anybody who's watching will fully agree, thank you. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for sharing with us today. You make us proud, and I'm really grateful for your life and for sharing. So to all the viewers that are watching, I look forward to seeing you in 2 more weeks with another episode of Salem Voices. But until then, and Jennie and I are going to say goodbye together here on countdown 1, 2, 3. You got it? We're going to say Salem Strong together and do a little fist bump. So Jennie, 1, 2, 3, Salem
Salem strong.
Strong.